A new report has found that the UK is facing a new normal of medicine shortages believed to be due to global supply issues. The think tank Nuffield Trust claims weakened trade links with the EU are likely to cause further problems in supply chains post-Brexit, and medics are calling the crisis a national health emergency. We've got Principal GP Dr Dean Eggitt with us, and Vincent Nin, of course, who spoke to us before. His son has struggled over the years with various medication shortages. Very good evening to both of you. Vince, nice to see you again, and Dr Eggitt as well. Let me start with you. Is this something that is a hangover from the sort of Brexit warnings that we all had? I mean, they were talking about how when they moved the European Medicines Agency out of London, it was all going to be a terrible disaster, which didn't turn out to be true. I know what Vince's problems have been getting ADHD medicines for his son, but what's actually going on out there, as far as you know?
Yeah, it's hugely complex, and Brexit does play a role, but it's not the primary role. So medicine shortages are not new, but they're definitely getting worse. And it's really partly because of global events, partly because the way medicines are regulated in the UK, and partly because we're no longer part of the EU, which means that we don't get to have the same priority access to the drugs and stockpiling that the EU has. So when there's a global event and there's a drug shortage or there is an ingredient shortage, we are impacted and we don't have that same insulation that we once had when we were part of the EU.
Right. Vince, let me come to you, because we spoke to you, I'm going to say a few months back, but, time passes so quickly these days. A few months back that your son wasn't able to get his hands, and you weren't able to get him ADHD medicine that he really badly needed. You were able to get it eventually. What's the situation now? Have you gone back to finding it a struggle again?
Well, he's on his regular, the medication he's got now, he's on that regularly. We have found that the prescriptions can be a little bit delayed at times, and so instead of doing a prescription to order them 1 week before, we're doing it 2 weeks before, just to take up any delay.
Right.
But what happened last October and November was pretty bad for him and for us as a family.
Yes, exactly right. And Dr Dean, I mean, one of the problems with ADHD medicine, I would imagine, is that an awful lot more people are currently being found to be requiring prescriptions, if you like. Many more people, I think, by a factor of about 100, are saying that they need ADHD medicine. So presumably that can be a contributory factor as well.
It is, yeah. Ironically, that's part of the problem, really, because we don't have a rapid way to increase medicines into the country anymore. So if we have a sudden spike in demand because there's an increase in diagnosis, we can't just say, well, here's a bulk load more for the country. So the people who already get it will get it, and those who have a new diagnosis are unlikely to get it. The problem being, of course, that those who are settled on a drug at some stage will run out. And the advice that we were given, for example, with ADHD medications is either refer them back to psychiatry for advice on what other drug they should get, or talk them through going cold turkey. It's absolutely terrible. And for people like Vince and his family, it's heartbreaking.
Right. And how much of this is a worldwide problem, Dr Dean, in the sense that it says here that, there's problems in Europe, the US, Australia? Is it a manufacturing problem? Are not enough medicines being made?
It genuinely is a global problem, but it's very complex. And I'm going to give you the example of, you may remember a couple of years back, the Evergreen and the Suez Canal. It took one ship getting stuck for global supplies of all sorts of things. And people will remember probably going into shops and seeing that the shops were bare. They weren't necessarily closed. There wasn't necessarily food items. And the drug supply chain is very similar. So it only takes one small shock to the world to have shortages of ingredients or specific drugs. So England, the UK is not unique with this problem, but our particular problem is also that we're no longer part of that insulation of the EU of stockpiling medicines to help each other out. And also, we have some ridiculous rules here in the UK, which means that the way drugs flow through the system is not particularly slick, and that makes the situation a great deal worse.
Yeah, exactly right. And Vince, you were able to get the medicines, as you said earlier, for your son Bradley, but I remember we also talked about there was a problem down in Minehead, roughly, sort of near where you live, where GP surgeries are getting shut down as well, which presumably doesn't help the supply chain problem.
That is correct. I mean, it was about 6 weeks ago that it was just announced on Facebook that our GP surgery was shut down by the CQC. No reason was given, and then it was taken over by another company or entity and was started up 2 days later. But it's the whole communication side of the NHS regarding this has been poor to the extreme, where parents have had to fend for themselves and cobble information together. I mean, when I spoke to you last October about this, come the third week of November, we got a letter through the post, which was a photocopied piece of paper stating your child's ADHD medication may be suspended. Please refer to your GP or limit the amount of medication or go cold turkey.
Yeah.
But how can you have a son that goes cold turkey when it clearly states on his medical records that if he does that, he will have serious side effects? So you're actually harming the child in trying to save medication which should be provided. There seems to be an incredible lack of foresight and planning on this.
Yes. I mean, I have to say, Dr. Dean, that does give you a sense of how people like Vince are having to deal with this kind of issue when they've got children who do need regular medication, but they can't sometimes find a doctor, they can't find somebody that can prescribe it. If they do, they can't sometimes find the supply that they require. And I mean, it gives me the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's an awful lot of sort of, you know, just-in-time type arrangements going on here. You know, like, you're lucky if you happen to be able to get the prescription filled. You know, I've had issues before with my family where you go to a particular pharmacy and they say, oh, we haven't got any of that at the moment. We can order it for you. Or, you know, try five or six other places and they have the same issue. Or they sometimes say, oh, you know, this particular medicine is in short supply.
Yeah, it feels like the NHS is in free fall at the moment, doesn't it?
It really
I've been
does.
on this programme before, already talking about how disastrous general practice is at the moment. And actually, pharmacy, the pharmaceutical industry and our community pharmacists are having similar problems of being on the brink of collapse. So general practice is on the brink of collapse. Our community pharmacy is on the brink of collapse. And quite frankly, it feels like we're doing the job with our hands tied, because even when you do finally get to see a patient who's been waiting weeks to see you and got through the telephone line, there's no medicine to give them in many cases. So again, Vince has told us about the harrowing stories of his family. And we're seeing this with diabetic patients with menopause who need HRT medicines, with people with terrible skin conditions who need steroids. This isn't infrequent. This is a daily reality. Several times per day, many hours per day are spent with me trying to figure out, well, what do I give my patient if it's not available? And similarly in pharmacies, they're thinking, well, what do I give or what do I advise the doctor if it's just not on the shelves and I can't get it?
So, I mean, just before we go back to Vince, what would be a simple solution to this, if there is one? Is it just more supply, more manufacture? What is it?
There is no simple solution. It requires some thinking ahead. But one of the main problems that we have at the moment in the UK, essentially, is that when the drugs do come into the country, they go to a wholesaler and then it's a free-for-all. Any one individual company can go to the wholesaler and say, well, I'm going to buy that and I'm going to stock up on it and have a stockpile because I want lots of it. There isn't really a way to get the drugs to the pharmacies of where it needs to be. That needs to be sorted, and reimbursement to pharmacies so that those pharmacies who can get to the wholesaler can actually afford to buy the stuff when they're there, because many pharmacies don't stock it in because they can't afford to buy it for the patients.
Right. And Vince, let me just finish up with you. I mean, does anybody talk to Bradley about whether or not you could move off the medication, or is it something that you think he's going to need through his entire life?
I think he's going to need it until he's at least 18 to 21. The positive note is that the medication that he's on now, he is really, really settled. His education is going on leaps and bounds, his behaviour, his whole attitude. So there has been a positive out of this, that the medication he is now being given has worked.
Right.
It's increased, the side effects of his appetite have lessened, so he's eating more. So, you know, you turn a negative into a positive. I hope he's not medicated for the rest of his life, but these pills seem to be doing the trick.
Right, brilliant stuff. We'll give him my best. Vince, thank you very much indeed for talking to us, and good luck with the family and all of that. Dr. Dean, great to see you as ever. Another problem that we raised some time ago. We'll still keep raising these problems as and when we can to see if we can fix them for people who need something that they're not being given. Exactly.